Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Oh, good. We've got. I love it. I don't call and response, right? This event today is a conversation anyway. So we're so glad you're here. My name is Jason Crable. I'm the executive director here at the Decorative Arts Center of Ohio, and I like to start off when we do these talks and we get folks signed up to come here, just by a show of hands. For how many of you is this the first time you've come to an event at the Decorative Arts Center or been to the Decorative Arts Center of Ohio? Great. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. Thank you all to the folks who have been here before. We're glad you're back. And for everybody who's never been here before, we're so glad you're here. We're glad that this particular conversation and exhibition brought you, and we hope that you will make the Decorative Arts Center of Ohio a regular place that you come to visit and return to, because I think we have wonderful programs and events and exhibits, and I think you'll discover that we're a great resource in the community, and so we're glad you're here. Just a couple quick things because we want to jump into the conversation. Before we get anywhere, I need to thank the people who have made this exhibition, these sets of exhibitions, possible. Our funders for this exhibition, and I'm going to pull this because, the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Memorial and Education Commission was a sponsor for this exhibition, as well as the PNC Arts Alive program and Patrick and Brenda Smith. And we couldn't do these kinds of world-class exhibits, conversations, and bring that to the community without support from supporters like them, as well as all of our members. If you're a member, will you raise your hand? Thank you. Without your support, none of this would be possible. And in fact, for those of you who know us, you know that the Decorative Arts Center of Ohio is always free to the public to come in and see our exhibitions. And so to become a member, really, you get discounts in our gift shop, and you get discounts on programs like this and some other perks. But really, the investment that you make and you get a nice membership card. But when you become a member of the Decorative Arts Center, you're really investing in the work that we do to bring the arts to the community and make it available to as broad an audience as possible. So thank you to all of our members, and of course our volunteers. We have some volunteers in the room. If you're a volunteer, will you raise your hand? Thank you so much to our volunteers. We have a very small staff, and it's our volunteers who really make things possible. We've got people trying to communicate through the door.
Open the door and come in.
Okay, so anyway, I am not going to go into Tariq's huge, impressive bio too far, because this is a conversation and we'll probably get to a lot of it. But I did want to just kind of point out Tariq is a man of many talents and accomplishments. His day job may be the most important professional thing that he does, which he's the director of Refugee Social Services at Jewish Family Services in Columbus, which means, and he'll be able to talk about this a little more, he literally picks people up at the airport sometimes, and his job is to help make sure that refugees who come to Central Ohio are essentially, that he helps set them up and get them situated, and really makes it possible for refugees to find a place here in our community. So he's also has active participation on Ohio's new African Immigrants Commission and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners' new American Advisory Council, and was recently named to the board of the Columbus Metropolitan Library by the Franklin County Commissioners, which is... He's a distinguished documentary filmmaker and photographer. He's had several exhibitions, including one that focused particularly on the Bhutanese Nepali community in Central Ohio at the Ohio History Connection several years ago, which is how we met, and we may talk about that a little bit. And the list goes on and on and on. So, like I said, we'll talk more about, you'll get to learn more about Tariq as we go into conversation. And so I think with that, we'll get started. So the plan today, we'll have a conversation. I've got a couple questions just to prompt that, and then we hope to have some time at the end, about 15 minutes or so, for all of you to ask questions if you have them. How many of you have been upstairs already to see the exhibition? Okay, about maybe a quarter of you, a little less, which is great. I think this conversation will help give real context to what you see upstairs. And I will also point out, and we'll mention this at the end, I hope, Tariq's exhibition is not the only exhibition in the museum right now. In our lower gallery, we feature the amazing art of Columbus-based artist Hani Hara, who is sitting right there. Hani has his own amazing story of coming to Central Ohio as a refugee when he was a child, and so it's a really amazing opportunity to bring these two amazing artists with sort of different points of engagement with the arts, but they really complement each other well. So make sure that as you go upstairs and see the exhibition we'll be talking about today, that you go downstairs and see Hani's pieces. And we have a conversation with Hani, or an artist talk with Hani on Sunday, April 7th, which is 2 p.m., just like this one. So mark your calendars for that as well. You'll want to come back and hear Hani talk about his pieces as well. So with that, okay. Hi, Tariq.
I was getting distracted by so many friends that I love and I miss that will keep coming in, and I just want to go out and give them a hug. So I'm going to restrain myself right here. So,
and I should say we have we're glad all of you are here today. We have some amazing first timers, some amazing friends, and so hopefully after this you'll be able to go see the exhibition. The museum is we close the doors to people coming in at 4 p.m., but if it takes a little longer for you to see everything, that's okay. And Tariq will also be in the galleries after the talk as well. So, Tariq, anything you want to add before we kind of jump in?
I just want to thank you all, seriously, for coming. It just blows my mind how many people care about what I do and the stories of refugees. So I appreciate it so much. And yeah.
Great. All right, so you'll see my very fleshed out questions here. The first one, Tariq, as it's written anyway, is why, which is essentially, can you talk a little bit about, one, why you do what you do, and as an extension, sort of why we're here today?
So, why? My journey started for losing my home and my country, and it created this vacuum in my heart and my mind. It's like, how can I make sure, since I lost my country, since I lost my who I was, as I arrived in America, how can I make sure that I continue that story, right? And so in 1997, 1998, I came to the United States.
As a refugee yourself?
As a refugee myself. And 4 years later, I get a job at an organization called Jewish Family Services, which I'm happily still lovingly working and supporting. So as soon as I started working, I noticed the idea of how important of storytelling and capturing stories is. And I started looking into what the Ellis Island photos of immigrants arriving in the United States. And nobody was doing that for my own story, my own people. And as you know, it's natural. You pick up a camera, you think, oh, I'm going to just make photos, and as a hobby. Then you realize the power of what you can do with this camera. And that is why. It is a combination of who I am, the place that I found home and employment, and the stories I discovered along the way of why is it important for advocacy reasons and empowering refugees. And I'll tell you, and any of you Africans Do I speak louder? They should have got up speakers here. We should blame the executive arts. So the idea is making sure that advocacy of photos continues. And do you want me to stand up? Should I stand up? Is it better if I? As a child in Africa, every time I saw Europeans take photos, it was always not an equal. The photographer was always here, and people that had been photographed were always the subjects of, look at these people, this is how they live. So my idea for me was, how can I tell my story and the story of other refugees as equals? And some of you have gone upstairs, and some of you will go upstairs, you will see these folks are photographed in a manner that is equal and dignifying, and not poor refugees feel sorry for them. And so that's why.
So for the purposes of context, can you talk a little bit about, because we discuss it in the exhibition, the idea of what a refugee is as opposed to other migrants, immigrants, kind of why refugee in particular is what we're focused on here.
So some of my friends will be tired of me saying this all the time because we say it all the time. But for you who have not heard me say this in the past, many of us in the United States throw the term immigrant, asylum seeker, undocumented, right? 90-day fiance, right? No, it's an immigration term, I promise you, not the show. I promise you, there's an immigration term, 90-day fiance, that for you to get and sponsor your spouse. But anyway, the point I'm making is refugee is a designated word for those who have been persecuted because of who they are and what they believe in and what they worship. So after World War II, the world said never again and declared a human rights and also declaration for saving human lives from persecution. And that is the declaration that many of the refugees today, either in this room or have arrived because of that statute and that law that supports refugees no matter where they're from. If you are persecuted, you have a right to be applying asylum, and you have a right to refugee claim, and you have the right to be resettled into third country, which we'll get into all those details. But that is the reason why protecting refugees is very important from past history of the world that had not been kind to certain groups for their religious beliefs.
Great. And we'll get into who we focused on in the exhibition and a broader conversation about Central Ohio refugees. But can you talk a little bit about why Columbus, Ohio is a destination for refugees from around the world?
If you haven't heard the question, why Columbus, right? Before refugees arrived, how many of you in Columbus have heard German village?
Ozark.
Right? Italian village? The point I'm making is America is historically, that's what we did. Immigrants have arrived, people created homes. So in the mid-1990s, Somalis first arrived here, and Somalis were resettled all over the United States: Atlanta, Nashville, Arkansas, Wyoming. So imagine if you are a Somali refugee and arriving in Wyoming with not a single person that looks like you, not a mosque, not halal, no kosher, none of that stuff. And then you have all your cousins in Columbus. Am I right? Yeah. That's how we came, right? So my witnesses are here, by the way. So, but the point is, this is what happens, is when you create, a city creates both culturally, cuisine, religion, and also public policy, and also a resettlement organizations that support, right? Like Jewish Family Services, who actually creates an umbrella around individuals, who supports them throughout their process. Then you will call your cousins in Wyoming and say, come here. right? So you have two choices, either Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Columbus, Ohio. But the Bhutanese Nepalis did not have that luxury. There was no Minneapolis. When they first arrived Columbus, because of the blueprint of what Columbus did for the Somalis, it was easier to follow. The school system had ESL programs. The real estate agents or the resettlement organizations or what have you, all these individuals, the pipelines were already built by Somalis, businesses were open. So it was easier for the Bhutanese and Nepali community to say, okay, so I see them, this is how we're also going to do it. Middle Eastern community, and then the Great Lakes of Africa, which we'll get into, that also are here and did the same thing. So Columbus becomes this inexpensive and easier to navigate versus if you were settled in Chicago, Atlanta, Boston, all those individuals will not be able to survive because of the resource of the resettlement is so small that they won't be able to survive in big cities like that.
Okay, so you mentioned, here, I'll pull this up since we, so this is a piece that's in the exhibition, but I think it highlights, just to give a sense of the scope of the communities that we're highlighting in the exhibition. So you can see that they come, from all over, Right. Those are not the only communities that have settled in Central Ohio. Can you talk a little bit just about the broader scope of who else is represented in Columbus and why these particular, why we highlighted these particular communities?
So we highlighted, well, first of all, every conflict around the world produces refugees, people who are fleeing that war. I'm sure all of you would agree with me. And the United States is actively making sure to protect those people, and the world in general, but the United States is the leading country that gets refugees out of harm's way. So the US is focused on all of those. So who is in Columbus? Pretty much every conflict around the world, from Ukraine to everywhere, there are people who are representing those conflicts and who are arrived here safely, right? But the reason why we chose that geographic region are the largest communities here in Central Ohio. So we wanted to give that focus. So you have, obviously, the Somalis. We arrived in the mid-1990s. And then shortly after that, the Iraq and Iraq war. There's a lot of refugees that came from Iraq and Afghanistan. And then Syria fell apart. Syrians arrived. And immediately after that, in 2008, 2009, you have the Bhutanese Nepali coming in very large waves. And then now, in the last 5 years, 7 years or so, the Great Lakes of Africa, which is the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and all that region, the folks are coming here in a very, very large amount. Individuals are arriving. So now we're seeing more of, as my JFS colleagues will tell you, that there are more people from Myanmar will be coming, Burma. We have people from Eritrea, which is the Horn of Africa as well. And we're seeing more conflict. Ukraine, huge amount of Ukrainian refugees have arrived and will continue to arrive. So that map will look also different in a number of years.
So JFS is one of the organizations in Central Ohio and that serves refugee communities. There are others. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what those others are. Can you also talk a little bit about what kinds of services organizations like JFS and the others provide for refugees? Like when we were talking the other day, you were talking about the experience, what the experience is for a refugee coming and the services that they're connected to. Can you talk a little bit about that, both the path and then also the services that are offered and how that gets navigated?
Sure. So when a refugee flees war, they go to a different country. That's the second country that they arrive. In case of Somalis, we ran away to Ethiopia and to Kenya and many other countries, but the closer ones were Kenya. So for Kenya, the refugee has three choices. Choice one, repatriation, going back to their country if a country is safe. If it's not, then they assimilate to the country that they are in. So they marry a Kenyan, they get absorbed by the culture. Third, and that is not there's the last resort would be a third country resettlement. United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, what have you. So only 1% of the globe, less than 1% of the global refugees arrive in third country. So as much as we're seeing all these numbers that I'm sharing with you, it is such a small amount of people. So let's say you were the lucky ones that selected to come to the United States. You go through, I have a whole lot of an hour slide of this, so I'll condense it very shortly here. You'll go through a health screening. Imagine that you're a refugee that never been to health screening for 20 years. That's the average time that you stay in a refugee camp. You're expected to pass the health screening to come here. Once you do that, you go through a security check. And that security check consists of retina, fingerprints, you name it, DNA test with you and your children to make sure that you both are who you are. And then, and only then, you'll get to come to the United States. And your ordeals are not over yet. So the chain in which you arrive in the United States, it's so complicated. You go through what a resettlement process is. You get through a State Department, then to something called a voluntary agency, which for us is HIAS. And then you come through, after all of that, you come through Jewish Family Services, which we, the staff of JFS, will pick you up from the airport, but we have information before you arrive to make sure that we know who you are, your name, how many kids, the age, and what have you. In 60 days, or less than 60 days, 40 days or so, we have to secure a home for you. Imagine, if your cousins are coming from abroad today, in 40 days, they have no credit, they have no Social Security yet, they have nothing, you have to get them an apartment. How many of you can do that? And you cannot co-sign for them, by the way. Right? If I take my hat off, I don't have hair because of it. I promise you. So, after all of that, JFS staff, amazing human beings. We make sure we get it home. We make sure the light is turned on. And by the way, imagine AAP with no Social Security, turning on AAP on your name with no Social Security and nothing yet. So despite all of that, each refugee receives about $1,000, little over $1,000. So if you're a family of 4, you receive a little bit, $4,300. That's it. Good luck to you. How much is the rent in an apartment in a modest working class neighborhood? Anybody?
$1,500.
$1,500. $1,500. The landlord says, okay, Tariq and Mr. JFS, since you don't have, this person doesn't have a credit, I would like 4 months in rent in advance. Remember you had $4,300? How do I get an electricity bill for you? How do I get transportation and support you that way? I'm telling you, it is the toughest thing a refugee goes through, that initial thing. But thank God we have supporters. We have other funds that support it, but we need you. This is not a pitch about fundraiser, but we need you badly. We really do. We need the public.
I do think it's a question because it is not cheap to do this work, and these are nonprofits doing the work, in coordination with the government and all. Where does that money come from?
The initial.
How does an organization like JFS or how?
Since my boss is here, she could maybe help me out here. No, but the idea is, yes, there is federal funding that comes through the resettlement process, and that supports that initial resettlement. But the refugee qualifies for what you qualify for if you're going through a tough time. Temporary needy assistant family, which we used to call welfare, right? SNAP, which we used to call food stamps, childcare, Title 20, and all of those things are furnished to the refugees. So it's not a gloom and doom, but the initial resettlement arriving, it is the toughest part. And after that, they qualify the same thing as any taxpayer of the United States qualifies for. But believe me, I've never met a refugee who says, oh, I made it. I'm going to stay on SNAP. I'm going to stay on food. No. they want to get off that public system as quickly as possible to get a job as quickly as possible. So for funding wise, federal, donations, partners, United Way, there's many smaller funds that come through to cover us, but believe me, it's never enough, right? To support the refugees and other programs, not just refugee programs, but we do other programs as well.
And I know that the refugee resettlement program is just one element.
One element, absolutely. We got the Holocaust support, senior services, counseling, financial support, financial literacy, and many that I can name. But
so you mentioned that refugees essentially, you mentioned they get roughly the same benefits that other taxpayers do. Can you talk a little bit about what the benefits, rights, and responsibilities of a refugee who is not yet a citizen of the United States, but what that looks like for a refugee?
right. Remember, I named all these immigrant groups, the student visa and what have you, and immigrants, and refugees are the best immigrant status to have. They're as good as an American citizen, right? They just cannot vote, and they cannot serve on jury.
But they can pay taxes.
They have to pay tax. No. That immediately is the first job they get. The taxes are definitely paid. Even when they buy something at the store, immediately there's taxes are collected. So the refugees are not immune. But the point is that refugees could potentially, once they get a job, they could get a job, and it's not about connected to their jobs or their employer or their school and what have you. They can go anywhere in the 50 states. They can buy a home as quickly as they arrive. So it's the best refugee status to have, best immigrant status to have.
I want to jump in to the actual communities that we have represented in the exhibition. Is there anything? But before we do that, is there anything else you want to say, broadly speaking, about refugees or the process or the work that happens once folks are in the States?
Yeah, I mean, there's many friends that I have that are very entrenched in the refugee world that support me and support the refugees. But if you're not, at least what you could do is support a refugee business, right? Go out. And also there are organizations like ours, truly, that is doing great work. There's volunteer options that you can come out and do that. And also ESL, teach somebody in English. Like, it depends where you are in your life. There's many things that you can support refugees. But first is getting to know, and this is a start for you to get to know who is in the community. So that's a great start.
Great. All right. So these are the communities that are represented in the exhibition, from struggle to strength. Communities from Somalia, the Middle East, which is specifically Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, as we discussed. Bhutan, and I want to talk a little bit about all of these, but specifically kind of I think that one is maybe a mystery to some folks. And then the Great Lakes region of Africa. Those four, and if you've been in our galleries before, you know that we have nice sort of areas where we can theme them. And so each space in the exhibition is represented by one of these four communities. So I don't know is there anything you want to say broadly about this? And then we do have sort of each group kind of called out with some images to talk, if you want to kind of use those to jump into.
But there's Bill Mon here. Bill, I appreciate you for partnering. And because of Bill, when you go upstairs, you see all that, stuff together. That's a genius man that put it together. Bill, thank you. Is Julie here?
Bill, I didn't call you out. Yeah, Julie. Is Julie here today? I don't think so. All right, Bill. Okay, so let's start with Somalia and that community. You mentioned that was, in terms of the groups of folks we're talking about, that was sort of the first wave that came to the States, which actually prompts the question, the model that we have for refugees coming to the States, how old is that model? I mean, when my great-grandparents came over, there were very few immigration laws. I think highest might have existed, but can you talk, what's the history of that? How recent is this model for refugee process?
Yes, the American immigration system, it was as crazy as it is today. It's always broken, right? But one thing about refugees, there were certain laws that protected refugees. The system that JFS currently is under, it has been in by law through the Jimmy Carter administration in 1981. But before that, it was one State Department, one country will be coming in because, let's say the Vietnam War, Laos and Vietnam, all those folks, there was designated time frame for them to arrive in the United States, and there were organizations that were designated to do that. But the current system, the organizational system that we have today, it's literally started in 1981 and after. But before that, HIAS, for example, would focus, for example, the Jewish community that is being persecuted, for example. How can we protect them? How can we get them out of harm's way? And Harry can testify to that because he came through that system, right? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's how you.
Picked up at the railroad station, not the airport.
So, but that tells you how old, or how young the system is, right? But it's interesting because nothing has changed. Atrocities, open the door, welcome the refugee, protect the refugee. Yes, we have streamlined now, and it's more organized now, but before it was incredible.
So the Jimmy Carter administration, the late 70s, early 80s is when the current system is sort of, and then a decade later or so is when the Somali population started arriving.
Right, yeah, so it's so Somalia collapsed in 91, so 95, but there were Somalis here as students and as professionals and what have you that stayed and applied for asylum and continued that way. But the refugee airlift is definitely mid-1990s that came.
So in terms of the sort of Somali story and why there are refugees, can you just, I know it's not easy to do it, but can you give sort of just a very brief, I kind of want to talk about each community and just some basic background. Again, the stories, there's context in the exhibition. So when you walk through the exhibition, you'll be able to see information about sort of the background of each community. But since we have Tariq here today, can you just talk briefly kind of about what prompted the refugee crisis in the first place?
I mean, it's about a 2-hour conversation, but just to give you a background, obviously, a lot of colonialism, Cold War, we're the product of that, and many of my Somali friends that are here today can tell you. I mean, there is, 100 years of colonial Italians and British that are there, dividing the ethnicities and people and what have you, and then you have a government takes over, and then all of a sudden there's a Cold War. This regime is supporting this regime is supporting this. Chaos. Bottom line, things deteriorate in 1991. Country collapses, no law and order, and everybody fending for themselves. And then you have refugee camps, like the Dadaab refugee camp, and in Ethiopian refugee camps there. And the U.S. was, welcoming individuals. Canada was doing the same thing. Europe was. But there's also other part that a lot of people don't understand. The Somali resilience is not waiting for that chance. And you have a lot of young people who lost their lives trying to get to Europe, trying to get to other African countries, who died in the hundreds. I was in Greece in 2016, and I met a young man who survived a boat that was crossing the Mediterranean from Libya to Malta or to Greece. And over 500 people died, and he was one of 5 survivors. So a lot of people lost their lives because the refugee process takes 20 years on an average. So you have to wait to be out of there for 20 years. And if you're young, unemployed, still have the strength to walk from Somalia to Ethiopia to Sudan to Chad to Libya. Imagine how much desert, that you're crossing. You get to Libya, you get arrested, you get beat up, you still don't quit. You get a small boat, 500 people die, you still survive, and you're telling your story on the other side of the European Union. So it's really, really hard, and I don't want to diminish that, but we as Somalis have gone through 20 years of absolute struggle, and to see these individuals, and I'm giving you a 0.00001% of these photographs, you could see how much we've come on the other side by being elected officials.
I was going to say, yeah, in the exhibition over the mantle in the Somali room, I think is a perfect example of from struggle to strength. Can you talk? So we're talking about the photo on the bottom right, the mother and her children, right? That photo was taken not in Columbus, right?
Right. So I took that photo in Dadaab refugee camp in 2008, and at the time, in 2006, the Ethiopian forces came to Somalia to what we call stabilize Somalia from, anyway, I don't want to get into it, but the point is there was a massive, even escalated war beyond that. A lot of refugees were coming in from Somalia to the Dadaab refugee camp. And that woman that you're looking at with the children there, she did not even have a tent ready for her yet. Imagine having that many kids. You don't even have a shelter. You don't have a place, no water yet. And it's heartbreaking. But also, can I go on to Munira? So next to that photo is Munira. Anybody know who she is? Tell me, who is she?
She's a representative.
State representative. In 1991, she was in Kenyan refugee camp after the war. Actually, no, she was born after the war, but she was around this age when she came to the U.S. So she was born in a refugee camp. And look at this now. So the point of the photo is those two photos are together, and that's what Jason is sharing with you, is to show the contrast between struggle to strength, right? They arrived in Columbus as refugees. Hard work, determination, fair and free election. She's representing you today. That's what this is all about.
So we don't have time to go through the details of each of the communities because I want to give time for questions. But like I said, in the exhibition, you can see some of that context as well. Photos from the Middle East communities. Anything you want to say about this collection, or these folks?
Again, same story. So Sinan Falah, who is on the far right, Jason's not sharing the clicker.
Here, take the clicker.
So
there are rules, Tariq. There are rules.
So Sinan, for example, came in the United States, was settled by Hayas actually, and came to the United States, very ambitious, wanted to do, so we saw that, at JFS we saw that, tenacity. We hired him, right? And today, not only he got his degree from OSU, he is working for the Defense, where's he working, Karen, again? Department of Defense, as a civil engineer, and he was named as #1 real estate agent And he's on today's or last week's Dispatch article about him of helping refugees secure homes. So I'm showing you 0.1% of this population, but there's hundreds of Sinan, hundreds of Munira. There's many people who changed their lives. But also at the same time, you have two people. Do you remember in a couple of years ago when we left Afghanistan rather quickly, and all the Afghans, especially the ones that worked with the State Department or U.S. government, had to fend for themselves, and they were on the side of. There are two individuals from that, in this photo, that has gone through that.
That were on those planes.
Yeah. So just put yourself, just for a moment, that you're working with a group, and that group abandoned you, and the group that you're running away from is at the doorsteps. And the only thing you have is that plane that you have to catch and run away. Very hard. And when I try to photograph them and tell them their story, you know what they tell me? My story's not interesting, man. What do you want? There's many of us with these stories. Why do you think mine is more important than others? We've got the young lady in the far left, million YouTube views. I've never met a human being with 1 million views in my life. So she's the first one. You've got Bilal on the top left there as well, works for Apple. So you've got young generations who are really like trying to integrate and become part of the society much faster than their parents and what have you. And this is a classic American too. Great-grandparents have Italian accents. The kids are not, right? So
then the Bhutanese Nepali community, which is a little Bhutan and Nepal are two different countries. Again, very briefly, can you talk a little bit about who these folks are and kind of what the background is for that community?
So I have a Bhutanese Nepali colleague of mine that is here. And also, by the way, there's Krish's photo there. Krish, you want to stand up for a second? That's one of the subjects that is here. So I hope, and Yadu, if I tell your story not in a good way, I hope you forgive me. But here it is. The king of Bhutan, hundreds of years ago, wanted workforce and wanted labor, and I requested from Nepal for people from that region to come to Bhutan and participate in the work labor. And people have come from Nepal and worked for the king and worked for the government and also became farmers and what have you, rebuild the country. Well, fast forward 200, 300 years later, there is the one Bhutan policy for every single person living inside of Bhutan to be a Buddhist or become part of that. Well, these individuals, they're originally from Nepal, Hindu practicing. How are you going to expect me to change? Purge, execution, killings have started. The Bhutanese and Nepali have escaped back to their origin countries, which is Nepal, and Nepal was like, we don't know you guys. You've been gone for 200-300 years, we're gonna put you in refugee camps. 2 decades, 25 years plus, finally the United States gave them, an opportunity to arrive, not in the United States, but Canada as well, and many other countries, but the United States did the highest number, and people have arrived. So when we say Bhutanese and Nepali, we just want to make sure that you understand the continuity and who those individuals are. But ethnically Nepali, by birth, the older generation at least, are Bhutanese. Yadu, did I get that right? Yes, you're right. Thank you. I was nervous. Every time Yadu's here, I'm nervous if I'm telling the story accurately.
And then finally, for us, is the Great Lakes region of Africa. Now, I, grew up in Ohio. I know what the Great Lakes are, right? Lake Erie is, of course, the best lake. But can you talk about this group? When we talk about the Great Lakes of Africa, it's not a single cultural group even. Can you talk a little bit about that group?
So the most complicated wars in Africa is the DRC wars.
DRC being
Democratic Republic of the Congo, I'm sorry, yes. And also Rwanda, Burundi. Those countries have been in civil conflict literally for over 30 to 40 years, or even more than that. So this region that are people coming from to Columbus are the eastern region of Congo, the Swahili-speaking Congo, Goma, and the Diamond region of the country, and hasn't seen peace in so long. Then you have Rwanda. I don't have to tell you why. You obviously know. And also Burundi is also, we've seen some refugees from that region. So instead of us naming them in all these three different countries, since it's the lake region also in Africa, and the Great Lakes for that matter, we call the Great Lakes, collection.
So at the end of our time, I'm going to give space for a call to action. But before we do that, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. Oh, look at that. Questions. Are there any questions for Tariq about what we've talked about today, about his work as a photographer, or?
Could you help me understand the term refugee that you've been using, and you mentioned camps specifically? I know there's a huge aspect going on right now with undocumented individuals coming through Mexico, and many of those are from Africa, and many of those, I understand, are fleeing conflicts, but that's not necessarily classified as refugee status. Can you help me just understand that?
Refugee is, as we said earlier, it's somebody who is claiming that I'm being persecuted because of ethnicity, political affiliation, sexual orientation. Those are the pillars of what the United Nations and the Geneva Conventions have identified. People like my fellow Somalis that are arrived as refugees, our claims have been substantiated abroad. So the United States and the UN have interviewed, determined, gave us the check, pass that yes, our story is accurate, and then we are going as a resettlement to the United States. The folks that are you seeing that are coming have not gone through that process. Some of us waited for the process to go through, for us to be brought here. And some are not waiting for that process. We met several people, actually came to us that we supported them. A young man that I actually met in Panama, he walked from Somalia all the way down to South Africa, got a fake passport, ended up in Brazil, and walked from Brazil to California. Just to be here in this country. And how many people you know that did that, right? Sit out, how many people you know that did that?
A lot.
A lot.
Even here.
Many. So those are the individuals you're talking about.
Yeah.
They come in, legal entry to the United States at the border, and then they claim their asylum.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, you come into the border, you say, I'm a refugee, they give you documents, you submit your address. 2 weeks later, you come in for an interview, you either determine that your story is accurate. 2 weeks later, you get your I-94, which is your status that you can stay in the United States. A year later, you get your green card. 4 years, 5 years later, you get your citizenship. That's how it was. Today, that process, just to see a judge or to see a government official, is 2.5 years. Even more, if you're lucky, that's it. And then you get a work permit, and the work permit every year it expires, and your employer is on edge. You lose your job because the work permit never arrived on time. So, and that's if you're lucky that you could see a judge. So imagine 2 years you're not seeing anybody and you're in limbo. Let's say that you have a child or you delivered, you have a child in the United States. Let's say you get deported. That child's a U.S. citizen. What do? You leave them? I'm telling you, it is the most complicated system that we have, and I hope we can fix it, especially for those who are fleeing war and persecution. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Quick question. Tell me about your first portrait. What inspired you to start taking that photograph? Because when I look at your portraits, you really captured the soul of the refugees and of that particular refugee. And tell me that process that came when you came up with that idea.
So honestly, it's studying history, right? Looking at the American historical record keeping. If you look at the American Civil War, if you look at the Farmer Security Administration, people like Dorothea Lane, people that went out, photographed the Dust Bowl, for example. You've got photographs of people that arriving at Ellis Island that are being portraiture. And also the classical portraits of Dutch masters and what have you. So I am basically capturing the current refugees and also making sure that they are archived. Black and white, negative film, so therefore, because the photos from the 1900s still exist in a negative form. So I'm capturing that in negative form so we can maintain another 200 years these stories to be alive, because they are part of Ohio history. They're Ohioans. We live here. We're part of this society. So we have to maintain that archivability for a long time. In terms of capturing the essence of who they are, I'm really capturing myself. This is my story. I'm not an imposter. I'm a refugee myself. I lost my country just like the folks that I'm photographing. There's an empathy there. But more importantly, professionally also there's an empathy. I do this for a living, right? Through the agency that I work, this is what I live, this is what I breathe every day. So dignity, respect for the people, and not exploiting them, right? Telling their story the best I can, because I can't mess up, both professionally and I'm in the neighborhood every day. If I tell a wrong story, they're gonna come talk to me, right? And you know our clients, they get very upset.
Think you mentioned neighborhood in Central Ohio or in Columbus. Are these communities all, touching each other, or where is that community in Columbus, like at that physically?
Yeah, so it depends on, so refugees are in decades, right? So decade one, we tend to concentrate on where we can support each other and help each other out. Decade two, we're like, oh, my kid's education is very important to me, let me run to the suburbs, right? Decade three is like, oh, I'm gonna buy a house. Or even shorter than that, but I'm giving you some sort of decade three. So if you're looking at refugees who are currently arriving, who are still in the sort of that first 5 years, Carl Road, Morse Road, Cleveland Avenue,
Albert Avenue.
Albert Avenue, right? Westerville Road. So that north end, so 43224, 43229 zip code-ish, that's where the majority of the African refugee diaspora is located. You're looking at the Middle East, Hilliard, and current Ukrainians are in Powell? Galloway. So Ukrainians, they have a big church. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's not only one community, like each community will come together and support one another, right? But after 7 years, 8 years later, it's education. My kids, I want to rescue them. I want to run away to the suburbs. I want to do this. And you see a lot of, like for us Somalis right now, we are really scattered everywhere. Am I right? I don't want to say one thing about my people. They're gonna meet me outside and talk to me. Yeah.
How long does it take to find jobs for them? Can they get jobs within those 90 days before everything runs out?
Susie Blair. Tough questions. Yes. Again, the government, God bless them, sometimes they send the documents for work authorizations or what have you as quickly as possible, but sometimes it gets delayed. So for the most part, refugees are obtaining employment as quickly as we can. Why? Because the place I work at, JFS, is we have a team after team of people who are professionals, who are from the community, who know the companies, who build the relationship. So we're trying to get people jobs as quickly as possible. Having said that, for those who live in Columbus, if you live in the north side and your job is at Groveport and you don't have a car, code a bus. It's not working.
Yeah.
So we have to come, as people that work with refugees, we have to overcome that. And Susan, you remember those days where carpooling and calling friends. And so 80% of our work is solving those problems. Is not actually getting them the job. It's making sure we have the infrastructure for people. Because we can get you there 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. But we need to make sure that you're there for 3, 5, 6, a year later so you can accumulate some funding so you can buy your own car and move forward. So do we get people jobs right away? Yes. Is it hard? Absolutely. So if you own a company, or if you have friends that own companies that want to hire people, please talk to me right after this. I want to make sure I get people jobs.
What about the Lancaster community? Do we have refugees, first of all, and what can we do to support them?
I'm sure there are refugees here, right? I don't know, but I'm sure we do have refugees. But what can you do? You're doing the right thing today by just hanging out with us, right? All of us together. 2, I'll give you my card and come to the organization. Let's talk about volunteering, get involved that way. And maybe you'll get more refugees moving here to Lancaster, which we don't want that, but.
Great.
So, Chris has a question? I think it's 3 o'clock.
Yeah, we're good.
How do you translate, get all the information you need? If it's cross-country, how do you get all the information from different countries? How do you translate it all?
Can you repeat the question for everybody? who
Yeah,
may know?
so many refugees are arriving. How are we translating our services to the refugees, and how do they understand it? How do they know what services? Cliff, am I right? Like, how are we translating the information to them?
How are you translating all the information you need to give them and all the information they need to give me?
Very excellent question. How is that cross-conversation happening between the refugees and us who are providing services? Well, the thing is, how many languages do we speak? Who's it, Jeff? Karen, how many languages do we speak now? 15? Yeah. So there are team after team of individuals that work at JFS that speak at least, they are trilingual, quadlingual. So, for example, I speak Somali, Arabic, and obviously English. So any refugee from that region, whether they're Arab speaking, Somalis, they can communicate with me. But also not only that, I know the experience. So it's not only translating, is you know the experience. We have people who speak Burundi, Kinyarwanda, French speakers, we have Swahili, you name it, we have the people that can speak it. But we also have other services that we can utilize, such as Buslingo or one of those, translating services that we have. I think we got the final answer.
We have time for one final question, and then we'll release.
Where is your studio, or where do you take the portraits? And then what instructions do you give the people? What to wear, what to bring? Or he's curious about that practical piece.
Absolutely. Our studio is located in Milo Grogan area in Columbus, Ohio. The Rogue building that. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Crazy. But that's where my studio is located. It's an old school building that is converted to all studios. It's called the Minor Arts Building. So that's where they're located. Instruction-wise, no instruction is given. I don't tell them what to wear. I avoid tell them what to put on. But if they decide to actually wear their cultural, that's perfectly fine. Do I prefer it? Absolutely, I do. And yeah, and posing wise, it's a matter of creativity of asking them to turn left or turn right. And I try my best not to ask them to smile or not smile. It's just their preference. But most refugees are, let's get this going, man. Let's go.
Great. So, first of all, as we wrap up here, because we want to give everybody a chance now to go over to the museum and see Tariq's amazing work and also Hani's work in our lower galleries. Let's give a big round of applause to Tariq. Thank you so much. Great. Here we go. But before we let you go, I would be remiss, and Tariq has peppered this in throughout the conversation, but call to action. What would you say, folks in this room who are interested in knowing what they can do, what would you say to folks?
I honestly would say start from an organized way. Get to know an organization that actually does this professionally, right? Because we can guide you how, where, when. Getting involved in helping refugees is like getting involved in your neighbor's business. It's not just, oh, I'm going to drop something off and leave. Once you get involved, you're involved in their lives. And these people expect you to deliver something for them, and they want to learn something from you. And for you, you might want to just volunteer once a week, like an hour. They may need more than that. So there's boundaries that we can help you making sure that to secure. But more importantly, time, commitment, and finances. If you could support financially some of the organizations that do this, it will be amazingly helpful. But your time is also very valuable. So some of the colleagues that I have are here today, and if you want to reach out, Jason knows my contact information, reach out to the organization. We'll leave all the information with you, Jason.
Yep.
And please volunteer once a week, once a month, just
Great.
as simple as that.
Great. Well, thank you, Tariq, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.